Yeah, you're right, Eric. I'm not Hogan. I'm not Savage. I'm not Sting. I'm Brian Pillman. And don't you ever forget it. And I have a dream. And that is to teach you and everybody else respect. And I'll do whatever it takes. Even if I gotta hack your thumbs off.
Easy, Pillman. Easy, Pillman. You are treading thin. Thin ice.
And welcome to the 5th edition of the Secluded Paradyme, a brand new look and view courtesy of a brand new webcam that I purchased, but the same old specs on from InYourHeadOnline.com and YouTube.com under the moniker Brightwave. Now, if you're not that familiar with the Paradyme, or you've been recommended by somebody to check it out, I'd just like to tell you the Secluded Paradyme is me discussing one specific professional wrestler, tag team, faction, or era in the sport of professional wrestling, past, present, or future. Now, without further ado, let's get right down to business. This specific episode of the Paradyme, I'm going to discuss personally one of my favorite wrestlers during the 1990s. I'm talking about the late, great Brian Pillman. Now, the first portion of the Paradyme, I'm going to discuss his career in a chronological format. The second part, I'm going to show you a cool clip regarding Brian Pillman. And on the third part of the Paradyme, I'm going to close the show out with me discussing some of my favorite Brian Pillman moments and some of my favorite Brian Pillman matches. But nevertheless, let's get right down to business. Brian Pillman basically started his career off in Stampede Wrestling, based out of Western Canada and the northwestern portions of the United States, and even dipped into some portions of the Midwest around the Wisconsin area and whatnot. But Stampede Wrestling was it was basically, when Brian Pillman came in, they were in their second run in regards to that organization, in which Bruce Hart was basically running the operations of Stampede Wrestling. But nevertheless, Brian Pillman really got his first break in the business by teaming with Bruce Hart in what would be known as one of the forgotten tag team combinations during the 1980s. I'm talking about Bad Company. That's right, Brian Pillman and Bruce Hart. And they were pretty darn good, I'm going to tell you. After watching some of their clips via several different social medias and ordering some DVDs and whatnot. I'm going to tell you, they are really, really good, and they were together, I'll say about a year and a half or so. It was a really strong run that they were together, but that's really where Brian really got his first break, and they were even international tag team champions at Stampede Wrestling. But that's where Brian really got his first break in the industry, by teaming with Bruce Hart and really getting himself noticed a little bit. And then he transitioned into a singles role. And that's where we're going to fast forward his career. In my opinion, that the staple of his career, where he did most of his work, and in my opinion, had so many different contributions that were not really known or really seen at the time by myself and several other fans. His stint in World Championship Wrestling. In 1989, Brian Pillman eventually goes to World Championship Wrestling. He had stellar matches with Lex Luger right off the bat. I mean, if you saw this, you would think the guy was a 10, 15-year pro, but in reality, he was only in his third year of in the professional ranks, and he was putting out really, really good matches in 1989. And several people know his stint as a tag team wrestler in the company with Tom Zink, the Z-Man, former United States Tag Team Championship combination right there. In my opinion, besides the Steiner brothers and the Fabulous Freebirds, the last great United States Tag Team Champions. And speaking of the innovation part, Brian was truly flying Brian Pillman. That's where he got his moniker in World Championship Wrestling. And he was this. This guy was doing stuff that you see a lot of the guys like Rey Mysterio Jr., maybe not to the extent, but Rey Mysterio, Evan Bourne, and some other guys who are doing all these high-flying moves today, the cruiserweights in World Class Championship Wrestling. In my opinion, Brian Pillman played a significant role into showcasing that in the United States with several other talents. Owen Hart was doing some good stuff like that as a Blue Blazer, not necessarily to the degree as a Rey Mysterio or the Luchadors in a really, really fast-paced capacity, but nevertheless, it was still high-energy wrestling, quick wrestling moves, spot move to spot move. But with Brian Pillman, everything was, he was a real master at his craft, or at least he developed into that. It wasn't just the high-flying moves of Brian. Everything Brian Pillman did in the ring when he was in World Championship Wrestling had a purpose. And I would really advise a lot of people to go back and look at those classic footages of Brian Pillman, footage of Brian Pillman in World Championship Wrestling at the time. Another great feud that he had in World Championship Wrestling, in my opinion, was with Big Barry Windham around 1991, in which those two had several really good matches, a feud that lasts about 6 months, and you really don't see stuff like that even today. Of course, World Championship Wrestling did some, dubious things about Brian Pillman and stuff that I don't necessarily like around 1991 with him as the Yellow Dog and whatnot. But nevertheless, he becomes the WCW, the first ever WCW light heavyweight champion, in which he won that tournament by defeating Richard Morton, aka Ricky Morton, at Halloween Havoc of 1991, a Chamber of Horrors match, in which, in case you have forgotten about that match, I believe the referee was Nick Patrick, and Nick Patrick had one of those webcams, head cams that a lot of the WCW referees were experimenting with. I guess that was something to do with the top management of the WCW wanted to change things up, but nevertheless, check that match out. Richard Morton and Brian Pillman have a really nice match right there, and everybody knows Ricky Morton can really go in the ring, so that was, in my opinion, a really good fit. Also, you fast forward to that, and around 1992 in Brian Pillman's career, in which he has, in my opinion, the best light heavyweight / cruiserweight angle that I've seen in regards to just for the sure in-ring wrestling that they were doing. I'm talking about the famous Japanese light heavyweight Jushin Thunder Liger and Brian Pillman facing each other around Super Brawl in 1992, and also leading into some epic battles that they had in Japan.